Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLaughlin Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
Nah, not quite.
What's up?
Sell my car in Carvana. It's just not quite the right time.
Crazy coincidence. I just sold my car to Carvana.
What? I told you about it 2 days ago.
When you know, you know. You know? I'm even dropping it off at one of those sweet car vending machines and getting paid today.
That's a good deal.
Oh, great deal. Come on. What's your heart saying?
You're right. When you know...
You know.
Sold.
Whether you're looking to sell your car right now or just whenever feels right, go to Carvana.com and sell your car the convenient way. Terms and conditions apply.
This Halloween, ghoul all out with Instacart. Whether you're hunting for the perfect costume, eyeing that giant bag of candy, or casting spells with eerie decor, we've got it all in one place. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time, minimum $10 per order, service fees, other fees, and additional terms apply. Instacart, bringing the store to your door this Halloween.
A Living History production.
I'm Matt McLaughlin.
And I'm Pete Smith.
We're battlefield historians who love nothing better than getting out and walking the ground where great battles in history took place.
And now we'd like you to come with us. Every week, Battle Walks will take you to one of the great battlefields of Europe.
As we walk the ground, we'll dig through the pages of history. We'll uncover the secrets of the battlefields, and most importantly, we'll tell the stories of the people who fought and died there.
Welcome to Battle Walks.
Hello and welcome to Battle Walks. Thank you for joining us again as we walk across the great battlefields of Europe. Thank you for all the feedback you've been giving us and all the suggestions. And actually, this was one that came in via a suggestion that we're going to do today. It's the New Zealand division, or part of the New Zealand division, very late in the war. It's a very specific one, but it's a fascinating action. It's not an action that I know a huge amount about, so I will be relying fairly heavily on my talented co-host, Mr. Pete Smith. Pete, welcome back.
Nice to be with you again, Matt.
So, the New Zealanders, mate, I've got huge respect for the New Zealanders in the First World War because they were some tough fighters. Again, they came from even further away than the Australians in many respects. And the New Zealanders seem to get on with the job in a very humble way compared to people like Australia and Canada and America that claimed that we won the war. New Zealand is probably the only group that I've seen that hasn't claimed that their little one division turned the tide of the First World War. But they still did some pretty amazing stuff throughout the war, didn't they?
They certainly did, and I've always had quite a tight connection with them. Our bed and breakfast, when I ran a bed and breakfast here, sadly now closed, was called Otago View, and that's because we sit very firmly on the battlefields in 1916. And literally, our house, where our house stands, was taken by the New Zealanders, or retaken by the New Zealanders, on the 15th of September in 1916. So we've always had quite a few New Zealand clients coming and staying in the property.
Where we're talking about today is right at the end of the war, November 1918. In fact, one of the most important New Zealand sites. Now, let's talk about the name to begin with. The English direct reading of the name would be Le Quesnoy.
Yep.
But I don't think a French person would have any clue what you're talking about if you pronounced it like that.
Well, I have to say, in the very early days when we first arrived here and decided to call our house, or call it and attract New Zealanders here, I had a chap sitting at the table over breakfast, and he was telling me that he was going to a place called Le Quinois. And I was nodding very kind of as if I knew exactly where I was talking about. And I thought, I have no idea where this place is. I'm supposed to be a battlefield historian. I just don't know where Le Quinois is. And then he passed a sheet of documents across, and on the top it said Le Quesnoy. And I thought, aha, Le Quesnoy, that's how you say it, Le Quinois. So that's how I discovered that the pronunciation is Le Quinois, but it looks like an anglicised version, Le Quesnoy.
I'd love to know what the New Zealanders referred to it as during the war, because the troops of the First World War were the ultimate humorous manglers of French names. I have no idea what they would have done with this one.
I think it was almost certainly called Quesnoy by most of them, I suspect.
Well, before we get started, Pete, maybe we should talk a little bit about the New Zealanders in general during the First World War, because a pretty proud history, obviously alongside the Australians for some of the time. But for a lot of the time, they were independent as well. So, obviously formed and went off to Gallipoli in the early stages of the war. But what about by the time they came to the Western Front? What were some of the great battles the New Zealanders are famous for in France and Belgium?
Well, I think the most important, I suppose, location for me would be my village, would be the fighting on the 15th of September. And it is, I think, perhaps one of their greatest battles, actually. Their first time in serious combat. They'd served in the nursery area along with everybody else. In fact, the stretcher bearers especially had been at Fromelles. But this was really their first independent divisional action, taking the village of Flers. And they did a very good job, I have to say. It was a very successful action. They supported both the divisions on the right and left that were having problems, as well as holding their own grounds. So I always view this as a very important action for them. But of course, they took an absolute pounding at Passchendaele, sadly.
They're also pretty active at Messines with the Australians and the Brits up in Belgium, leading into the Third Battle of Ypres. The New Zealanders actually took the town. And it's something, when you visit the battlefields, every country has a different way of remembering its soldiers. But I like what the New Zealanders have done. Australia sort of tends to group its remembrance in specific areas of concentration, but the New Zealanders decided that they were going to remember all their lost men in particular on the battlefields where they fell. So it's extraordinary the number of times you'll be just pottering around the Western Front and come across a beautiful New Zealand memorial with a list of names, maybe only a couple of hundred names, but a list of names of the missing from that sector. And it does really paint a fascinating perspective of what the Kiwis did and how far they fought across the Western Front. And also the memorials with that fascinating and moving inscription from the uttermost ends of the earth. So I think the New Zealanders really have done it well, and there's memorials to the missing at Messines. There's one at Polygon Wood where they occupied the sector in 1918. Passchendaele, of course, and so you just have these little memorials on key locations, and it really does paint a great picture of just what the New Zealanders got up to during the war.
Yep, there's one here, just in Caterpillar Valley Cemetery. There's another one close for the fighting in 1918, a place called Grevillers. They have another one there, memorial to the missing, and of course they have one in the centre of Armentières as well. In City Bongine Cemetery, they have a memorial to the missing. So I think it's always nice, and it adds that extra bit of information, I suppose, to go and look at a memorial that is in the heart of the battlefields where they fought and died. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the New Zealand memorial here overlooks this house, so we can see it from almost all of our windows and the garden looking up onto the ridge beyond. And in fact, that's why we called our house Otago View. It's the view that the Germans had of the Otago regiment, the battalion, as it cleared the ridge and came into the view, and so started getting hit by the machine guns, which were firing from our house. Our house was a German strong point. So, yeah, I've always had a big connection to the New Zealanders here.
If you were lucky enough to go to the Western Front for Anzac Day, which all of our Australian and New Zealand listeners will hopefully do one day, but if you were to go to the Australian Anzac Day services, that would take place, of course, at the National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. But the New Zealanders, interestingly, have their main memorial spread on two sites, effectively, because they've got the memorial in the Somme at Longueval. But then, of course, they've also got this other place that we're talking about today, which was, even though a small action by the standards of the First World War, even by the standards of what was going on in November 1918, very, very important to the New Zealanders. It was the last action they took part in, wasn't it, Pete?
It was the last big action. I mean, they will continue on for a couple of days, and it is right at the end of the war. It's the 4th of November, so we are literally at the end of the war. 11th of November, the armistice is going to be signed, so they've got a few more days. But yeah, this is, and it's an important action, only in the sense that it was just them, it was just the New Zealanders, and they're taking a whole fortified town, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So a very interesting and important action in the last days of the war.
And this is a long way away, isn't it? This is not in the heart of the Somme, or this is way off to the east, because the Germans were being pushed back so far. It's like this phase for the Australians. I mean, the Australians weren't fighting this late in the war. The infantry, that is, had been withdrawn in October. But some of the last battlefields for the Australians are a hell of a long way away from the key sites you would normally visit in the Somme and in Ypres and in Flanders. This is the same, isn't it?
Well, this is almost getting as far away as you can get, because we're only, say, 4 days from the armistice. So we're literally, or 4 or 5 days from the armistice, we are literally right at the end of the war. And the New Zealanders had been basically fighting for 77 days. They were 77 days, part of the 100 days, the 100 days that will eventually end the war. Well, 77 of those 100 days they were fighting. And they travelled 56 miles. So they travelled 56 miles. What's that in kilometres? I haven't done my conversion today. But anyway, whatever it is.
It's about 80 odd kilometres. It's a long way.
Yeah, it's a long way. Anyway, yeah, and so they led that
on foot under fire as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to remember that's not on a bus or a stroll across the countryside. That's fighting across.
It isn't every single day fighting. So 77 days of hard fighting. Yeah.
Well, it's little wonder they remember it so fondly. Let's talk a little bit about the town and where it's located and how the New Zealanders came to be here.
Well, it's right on the extremities of France, really. It's very, very northern France. It's a walled town, and that's why what we're going to be talking about. And just to give you a kind of a mental image of it, I'm sure most of you will have seen photographs of Ypres and the ramparts around Ypres. Well, that was a Vauban fortification. Well, this is also a Vauban fortification, but the ramparts around Ypres have either been dismantled or were damaged and then rebuilt, but they're not complete. Well, these almost are complete. So it's a complete walled city on the edge of France. The nearest big town, if you're looking for it on a map, is Valenciennes. That is the nearest town. That is right on the border with Belgium, so that's the nearest big town. It's now called Haute-de-France, so High France, but it's in the Department du Nord, the northern department of France.
And the Germans were obviously just trying to hold on to this. I assume as a walled city, it gave them some sense of protection and was an area they could hold. So how did the New Zealanders come to be given the task of attacking La Quinoa?
Well, I think it's directly, if you draw a line really from, from Bapaume, which is their first action of the 100 days, and you draw a direction, it's the same way they're going, they're travelling the same way, it's northeast, slightly northeast, to the end of the war, and if you draw that straight line, then that's the direction they're going, and right slap bang in the middle of it will, towards the end, will be La Quinoa. So it's they were just lucky or unlucky that it's going to be allocated to them to take. And in fact, I think a lot of the men would see it as lucky. They felt they wanted to have one last crack at the Germans and at capturing something substantial. They're not alone. They've got British divisions on both sides. So it's but the actual taking of the town itself is going to be left to the New Zealand division.
Well, walk us through, Pete, how the New Zealanders went, how the attack unfolded, and obviously the success that the New Zealanders had overcoming the Germans.
It's such a historic town, is La Quinoa, before we start talking about the New Zealanders, that I think for anybody, you need to do a little bit of history and reading about it before you go, because it is an absolutely fascinating place. It has been fought over for forever. I was trying to count the number of times that it was destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and taken and changed. And you have to say that it wasn't... for a long, long time, it is actually part of, well, either the Spanish Netherlands or the Flemish region. So it's not even part of France for a very long time. So it is a fascinating place to go and look at. It didn't become French permanently until 1659, just as one figure to throw in. So let's think about the date. So it's the 4th of November 1918. It's towards the end of the war. And the New Zealanders are faced with trying to take this town. And there are several issues connected with it. The first one is they know there's a German garrison in there. And the first thing they're going to try and do is to persuade the guys to surrender. So to do that, what do you have to do? Well, they thought they'll try and surround the town. So that's what the attack's going to be about to start off with. Hopefully they're going to take the town without any fighting other than the fighting around it. So that's where we get the first fighting. So I'll just start reading some notes. On the morning of the 4th of November in 1918, at 5:30, a series of explosions woke the townspeople. Now, these explosions are caused by 300 oil bombs, and these are, I suppose, big containers filled with oil, and they're going to cause fire and smoke, and they're going to land on top of the Vauban defences. So why are they going to do that? Well, it's because of the civilian population. There's at least 3,000 civilians. They're not sure how many, but there's at least 3,000, potentially 3,000 civilians within the town, and they don't want to kill them. So they're going to drop most of their projectiles on the actual the defences around the town. These Vauban defences, the ramparts and the fortifications, and not drop any into the town itself. So we started with these oil bombs, 300 of them, fired by living.
I just want to say, Pete, it's all very medieval, isn't it? The whole concept of big walls and a siege and boiling oil, even. It's all, we're harking back to the Middle Ages.
It is, and that's what it felt like. And some of the men who were assaulting in the New Zealand division, who'd read any kind of history, felt that right the way from the start, that this was... And you only have to, as we're going to walk around the town. When you stand outside the ramparts looking up, it is rather daunting, to say the least. How the heck... If we're not going to destroy the town and we're not going to blow great holes in everything, how on earth are we going to get through these fortifications, which were right up to the 19th century, had been improved and improved and improved, and then eventually abandoned, and they become, they become walkways, they become pretty walks, as did the fortifications at Ypres. People will walk around the top of the walls and relax. So it's very daunting to be assaulting something in the old style, you'd almost say. So they're now going to drop mortar rounds from both the Livens projectors firing the flame bombs, and then mortar rounds, medium trench mortars, going to be firing onto the ramparts, and then they're going to start going left and right around the town itself to try and seal it off. 37th Division is on the right, that's a British division, and the 62nd West Riding Division on the left, and they will support, but it's the New Zealanders who are tight to the city. It's going to go unbelievably well. They have a blue, green and red objectives, and as you can imagine, the red is the final objective, and this attack starts at 5:30, and by 11:56, still in the morning, they've captured all their objectives, but what they haven't taken is the town itself. So we've gone all the way around it, so this is when we start asking, would you like to surrender? And the answer from the Germans is nothing to start off with. So they send in a party of captured Germans to go and hand over a request to surrender. Nothing happens at all. And that was at 11 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, they try again. And again, no response whatsoever. And then eventually a German comes out and he admits that the men themselves would like to surrender, but the officers are not going to let them. So I'm afraid it's a no. The final attempt is they drop in leaflets from the air. So they're using aircraft to drop in leaflets, and still no, they're not going to surrender. So they're going to have to attack. Well, what we've done, where we are at the moment, we've driven into the main, the square, and we've parked up the car, and it's General Leclerc, but it's now called Place de Cambridge as well. You'll find a dual naming, a lot of it relative to New Zealand, and this is where we're going to actually start our walking tour, is from the town square. So we're standing in the town square at the moment. Interestingly, nice little bar in the town square. They do food as well, so it's I always point these things out, and they've got a toilet. Always helpful to know where they are. So right in the centre of the town. And to get here, we've driven over one of the bridges and the old routes into the town. So we've actually already seen some of the ramparts to get here.
Pete, it's an exciting story. As you're telling this, I'm like, it's one of those gripping tales from the First World War. Just, as you're telling that story very very well, I'm sitting here going, so what, did the Germans surrender? Did the New Zealanders have to attack? And I tell you what, it would have been a tough gig to be a German machine gunner in the town, willing to surrender, but now knowing you're going to have to fight and potentially die in a town that you were happy to give up, especially when you knew the war was effectively over.
Without spoiling the story, I think that's partly the story of the town. The Germans put up a rudimentary, and don't think they didn't kill anybody, they killed quite a large number of New Zealanders who were attacking. But you get to a point where you think, if I fight on much longer, then I'm not going to be taken prisoner. And it's something that all soldiers know. And I think the Germans realised that if they fought on for very much longer along these ramparts, then there was a potential that none of them would be taken prisoner. And so I think the Germans played a very clever game of doing enough to look like they put up a proper defence of the town and probably please their officers, and then they were off, basically.
The New Zealanders had a reputation as well by this stage as being pretty ferocious fighters. They weren't big on well done, well played, chap. Let's go and have a quiet beer.
Yeah, prisoner taking was not one of their better fortes either. I don't think so. Yeah, and certainly here for the fighting here, right at the start of their experience, the Germans actually complained via the International Red Cross that the New Zealanders had not been taking prisoners, so yes, I think the Germans knew because they kept a book on everybody, literally on what they thought of you and how you fought, and so with the New Zealanders, I suspect they knew what was coming if they fought on too long. So let's head off on our walk. We're going to leave the square and just imagine looking around you. This is quite beautiful, apart from the buildings right in the heart of the town around the square. And sadly, it's the flipping Second World War again. Now, there's a lot of this town which is very beautiful, old buildings going right the way back to the Middle Ages. But here in the town square, it's 1950s concrete. Some of the buildings here, including the bar I've just said that is a nice bar to go into. It's a nice bar inside, but it's not so pretty on the outside. They've been doing a bit of work in recent years to try and make these buildings look more attractive, but 1950s concrete buildings, rebuilt buildings in the 1950s are not attractive buildings, and sadly we have a little ring of those around the square. But outside of the main square, it improves, and we're going to head to the Hotel de Ville, which is the town hall. And this is a beautiful building, and before we get there, we're going to walk past the War Memorial. So this is the town War Memorial that we're going to walk past, and there is a mention on there of the New Zealanders, and basically it is, I'm paraphrasing here, but it is basically saying that thanking the New Zealanders for saving their city in 1918. So there's already a memorial in their town memorial, which commemorates their dead from both the First and the Second World War. The belfry of the town hall has a very interesting history in its own right. It was built originally in 1583, destroyed in 1794. I have actually no idea what war that would have been. 1794. Oh, it might have been destroyed. That's French Revolution. Austrians. I think it's the French Revolutionary Army fighting the Austrians, because the Austrians took advantage of France being in turmoil during the Revolution and decided to invade. So I think that's the date, 1794. 1918. So it's badly damaged during this fighting because it was a tall tower, and again, sadly, exactly the same reason. 1940. Tall towers tend to get a pounding. So the belfry had been rebuilt. It's got 48 bells. They can't be big bells. I was looking at it when I realised 48 bells. If these are big bells, then it wouldn't work. So they must be quite small bells. But 48 bells in the belfry. And in fact, I think I've heard it pealing out several times when I've been there. So we're going to go past the town hall, turn right, and we're going to go down Marshal Joffre. Do you say that Joffre or Joffre? How do you say it, Matt?
I think the French would say Joffre,
yeah, I think
but Joffre. I think our Anglicization again. Of,
I like to use both my fluent French and the Anglicised, or
sometimes even somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
I think works really well too.
Yeah, that's actually probably the most common for me. Again, dual naming. It's called Helen Clark, the road here. She was. Is she still? No, she's not. She was the premier, wasn't she?
She was the Prime Minister of New Zealand for a long time.
Yeah. And so it must have been in the period during the commemorations, possibly the 90th. They did an awful lot of commemorations for the 90th. Didn't get there for the 100th because I was too busy with the Australian battlefields, but the 90th I was there.
I believe her uncle or great-uncle was served, or indeed was probably killed, I think, in the First World War. Helen Clark always had a very strong connection to the First World War because of her family. So particularly leading up to the centenary, she was very very active in promoting the New Zealand interests in the Western Front.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to call it, we're walking down the Helen Clark Road towards one of the gateways out. Now, if you're reading the notes, Matt, you'll know that I'm coming up to a word that I have absolutely no hope of pronouncing. So this is port, which means a gateway. So this is one of the gateways, Farolux. Oh, Lord knows. That's what it looks like, anyway. And we're really
outdoing ourselves in this podcast, Pete, with our tour of France.
I'll tell you what I'm going to have to do next time, because on the right-hand side, just before we get to the gateway, is the tourist office, so I should stick my head in there and say, how do you say this? Perhaps I'll do that next time we're there. And so this is actually, interestingly, one of the only gateways not to be damaged during World War II, because the gateways were very badly damaged. You can imagine, start off with tanks can't get through the small gateways, and I think a lot of the Germans would have destroyed any gateway, because they viewed gateways as not a good thing if you're trying to take a place. So this is the only one that survives, and it's an excellent, very beautiful gateway. A lot of this town is very, very beautiful. So we're going to walk out a little further, and we're going to have to turn around and come back, but we're going to walk out across the moat. There's a bridge here going across the moat onto the outer defences, because here we have layers of defensive, great big walls, inner defences, but there's great big walls on the outer defences and a moat in between in some of the areas. And this is a very wide, it's almost a lake rather than a moat here, and we're going to cross that and go and look at the outer defences, turn around and look back at the city, and you get a really good view of the town from the outer defences. And then we're going to walk back in again, back under the gateway, and we're going to turn left and walk up a slope, or you can go up the stairs, whichever you want to do, up onto the top of the ramparts. Now, this is, I can't understate how spectacular it is and how different it is to the very well organised and manicured walkway around Ypres. If you're going to Ypres and look at the Vauban defences there, manicured, beautiful walkways. These are not that. These are rough tracks on top of the walls, and I have to say, I do not take my children onto the top of these walls, because there is no fence whatsoever on your left-hand side, and when the grass is a bit slippy, it wouldn't take a great deal to start sliding down the bank and straight over the edge, and it's about 30 or 40 foot over the edge, so you really don't want to take your children up here. But it's exceptional. The views back into the town are great, and the views out to the fields, open fields beyond, and sometimes the town is spread a little beyond the rampart, so we get both. And in fact, on this side, the left-hand side, as we're looking out from or straight ahead, depending on which way you're walking, but in the direction of our travel, if you look to the left, you can see some lakes, and these lakes actually fed the moats to make sure you could spread them. So in time of war, you could spread the moats, fill them with water, make them even wider. So these lakes were used for that, and they're on our left-hand side. So very beautiful. It's a lovely area. And we're going to walk along these ramparts, these walls, until we get to the first bastion. It's Bastion Vert. Oh, I can say that word. Bastion Green, that means. You know, my French is fantastic. And this is the first. So the bastions where the guns would be, and very cleverly designed. This is a star-shaped fort, and so it means that on these bastions you could fire to the sides and you would enfilade anybody trying to attack the walls. And of course, this is exactly what the Germans are doing. It still works. A machine gun, a mortar, an artillery piece, because they even had 77mm guns on the ramparts. Superb. So this is what we're up against. The New Zealanders are going to be up against. So this is one of the bastions, and it's the first one. And so,
Pete, I've got to ask.
Yeah.
It's such an obstacle, these walls. How in the hell did the New Zealanders tackle it without destroying them?
Ladders. So we're going straight back to the medieval again. So it's ladders. Now, I've been trying to find out. I remember reading at some stage in the past, probably many years ago, that the ladders were from the orchards that they were passing through as they approached the town, because they suspected this was going to happen, but they realised that they still weren't big enough. And so they had to literally join ladders together or make them. So it's the pioneer sections within the battalions and the engineers who are trying to manufacture ladders that are going to be big enough, long enough to get up the walls. And when you look, you'll realise these are like fireman's ladders. These are going to be humongous ladders. And remember, these guys are going to have to attack under fire to try and get these ladders up against the walls. And that's going to be part of the story. But that is literally what they're going to do. So it's just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary. And the casualties were fairly heavy in the attempts to get the ladders in place. And this is going on really most of that afternoon, that late afternoon, as they realise that they have got to take the town, that they're trying to get ladders in place so that men can get up there. And there's an awful lot of scouting ahead, people trying to scout ahead and spot where there's a potential to cross the moat in some places. And in fact, where they are going to be successful, we're going to get there in a little while, where they're going to be successful is where they can cross over on top of almost like a lock gate to get close to the wall and then get the ladders up there alongside the wall. But we'll come to that in a little while.
Just extraordinary.
Oh, it is
just
extraordinary. It is extraordinary.
Bravery of the highest order.
It is. And the guys that actually eventually got over the wall were not fired at. That's what the extraordinary and slightly odd thing is. They've been fighting. The Germans have been fighting and fighting and fighting and firing mortars and snipers and lobbing grenades over the wall. And yet the section of the wall that these two officers eventually managed to get up and get onto the top of the ladder, they were not fired at, and will climb right the way on without being fired at all. And they then spot two abandoned machine guns. And this is when you get this feeling that the Germans felt that they'd done enough. They knew they were cut off. They knew that they were going to be taken prisoner. And I think that's what they wanted. So they didn't continue fighting. And because if they had, you can imagine these two officers getting shot off the walls, more and more trying. When they got into the town, there would be mayhem. They would not have taken any prisoners. So it's an interesting action. But anyway, on with the walk. We'll just go a little bit further before we reach this location. So we're going to carry on walking, and just wanted to quickly talk about this. We're going to drop down off the wall again to it's another bastion area, but it's also, as we drop off the walls, it's where for a long time New Zealand has been looking to do something here to enhance the New Zealand visitors' experience. And like the Sir John Monash Centre, which is a superb resource for Australians visiting the battlefields, they wanted to build a small museum, a visitors centre, and perhaps even a hotel that would be designed for New Zealand battlefield tourists. Now, I have to explain all of that a little bit. This is so far off the normal battlefield for your average battlefield visitor, and this is the big problem with Le Quinois. Most battlefield visitors will not go here. I wouldn't take a casual visitor here. Generally speaking, they are New Zealanders who want to go there because they know all about it, and they would do. It is a famous action in New Zealand, but your average battlefield visitor probably hasn't heard of it and wouldn't want to go anyway, because it would take a whole day of his tour or his time here out, when you can see 30, 40 kind of battlefield locations on the Somme or around Ypres, whereas he'll just go there, visit that, perhaps might even go somewhere else. We're not that far away from Le Cateau, so maybe go to Le Cateau or Mons as well, and sometimes you can tie it in with those too, but he's a long way off the normal battlefield. So this area that we're just standing in, it's called, there's a chateau here called Marguerite de Bourgogne, and it's a very famous chateau, all very run down. I have to say, I looked at these only about, I suppose, a year ago now, last time I was there, and very run down and looking like they desperately need to be renovated. And but thankfully there were some builders there, so hopefully these are slowly going to be renovated, some of these old buildings. But it's in this area that New Zealand was hoping to build some kind of visitor centre. I don't think it's going to happen. Too many things have happened since the last New Zealanders came here, looking at putting a building up here and developing it, the earthquakes and then COVID and everything else that's going on in the world. I can't see it, but we live in hope that something will be built here. So we're going to rejoin the ramparts again, and we're going to be travelling up Avenue des New Zealanders. Again, a name very relevant. And passing through Bastion du Gard, and then through a sallyport. A sallyport is a doorway facing out to your enemy, so it's where normally soldiers could run out and do a bit of fighting, then run back in again behind the walls. So out through a sallyport and over the moat to the outer walls. And we're going to walk along the outer walls a little while, and what we get is now a real idea of what a New Zealand soldier from the 4th Rifles, one of the attacking battalion, would have seen as he cleared the first lot of defences and had to cross the moat to try and get his ladders up against the wall, and they did take quite heavy casualties in doing that. But eventually we will have success, and that's partly due to the man who will actually climb the walls himself, Second Lieutenant LCL Averill, MC. He'll be awarded the MC. And he's the intelligence officer for the 4th Rifles, and he will spot the location, and then he will lead his men up the walls there and eventually into the town itself. And the walls will be breached at 1600, 4 o'clock is when they successfully breach them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just read his account of that breaching. So this is the account of Second Lieutenant LCL Averill, MC. The time was approximately midday on the 4th of November 1918, and we still had not gained entrance to Le Quesnoy. We were, however, making progress, and the German firepower from the walls had lessened. There were 2 outlying bastions. Fortunately, the possibility of wall climbing had been foreseen, and a ladder had been provided by the engineers. The CO was anxious these bastions should be explored, and so with 5 or 6 men, I put the ladder against the wall, and we climbed it and drew up the ladder behind us. These are the outer defences he's talking about here. We took the ladder down on the 3rd and sloping grassy side of the first bastion, only to find a similar fortification straight ahead. So this is the main bastion that they've got to overcome ahead of us. The wall climbing of the second bastion had to be repeated, and from the top of this outlying ramp I could see that we could now approach the main and final wall of this well-fortified town. So actually it wasn't the final one, that's another bastion, so he's gone over 2 walls already. The 30-foot ladder was too short to reach from the bottom of the moat to the top of the final wall, but there was one place where the ladder could be placed to reach the top. This was on a narrow stone bridge about a foot wide which spanned the moat and was connected with a sluice gate. After crossing this bridge and sluice gate, a narrow ledge ran for some 10 yards beside the wall to an arched opening giving entrance to the town. Now this is all there now, and in fact we're going to cross it. Once we've read this account, we will actually walk across this little bridge and up to the gateway, giving entrance to the town, but which, needless to say, had been completely blocked by the enemy to deny us access through the wall. It was only on this narrow wall above the sluice gate that the ladder could reach the top. So we're now, that's his account, and we're now going to have a look at an account that was by the divisional history. It's written in the divisional history. The whole place was ominously still for the gurgle of water in the moat below them. Quietly they raised the ladder against the wall. It reached the top of the bricks with a foot to spare, resting against a 2-foot grassy bank which crammed the rampart. 2 of the riflemen steadied the ladder on its insecure perch, and Averill started to mount it, telling the others that he would shout down to them from the top if all was quiet. Averill quickly reached the top of the brickwork and stepped over the coping onto the grassy bank. Crouching behind it, he peered over it. And it says here, it was one of the most dramatic moments in the divisional history, and you can imagine it would be. That tension must have been unbelievable, knowing that there was a potential of half a dozen machine guns pointing at them. There was an instant crashing through some brushwood on the far side, and Averill saw 2 Germans of the bombing post running off panic-stricken. He sent 2 revolver bullets after them. Kerr, who was another officer who was with him, was now on the topmost rung, and the 2 officers could see a pair of machine guns on the salient on the right, pointing into the moat but abandoned. They stood up and walked over the grass slope and down the other side towards the boulevard. Avril recalled that the Germans soon, he describes it as threw up the sponge. He means that they started surrendering. After being under the heel of the Hun for 4 years, the delight of the people of Le Quesnoy on being free again knew no bounds. So we know the Germans very quickly surrendered. They poured out of the underground chambers. This had underground chambers everywhere because it had been fortified for such a long time. And very quickly they were rounded up by the New Zealanders as they now poured over on this ladder and then opened up the way for the main entrances to be opened up, and more men could come in that way. I'm just going to read one quick account by a private soldier who was there, a chap called Reg Herd. He sent this letter to his girlfriend Nellie Dean in Collingwood. At 5:30 a.m, every man was at his post and the barrage opened up. It was a barrage, just one mighty crash. I never heard anything like it before. The ground shook and trembled and the bursting shells lit the ground up. It was like hell let loose. Now you have to remember this is all on the ramparts, not on the town. Volunteers were called for, men to place long ladders against the wall for the storming party to get over. Well, I volunteered for one and I had a good mate. The smokescreen was intensified and we slipped down into the moat and got almost to the foot of the wall when he spotted us and opened out on us from the top of the wall with machine guns and rifles, and not more than 40 feet from our heads. How on earth they did not kill the pair of us, I don't know. He tore the ground up at our feet, but we placed a ladder and took off for our lives. It was lucky for us that he had to shoot down at us and not straight at us, else napoo. We got behind the angle in the wall and dashed back into the thick screen and got back safely after a severe flight. We had won the inner ramparts and were faced by another moat on the walls of the citadel. It was just about 12 o'clock now and we had a bit of a spell for a while. But by 4 o'clock we had got a footing on the walls of the citadel and after a sharp fight had captured the whole garrison of 2,000 men. It was one of the greatest feats yet done by the New Zealand troops. We marched up the city square and it was a splendid reception that we got from the civilian population. So a really interesting report. So he's not actually involved in the final rush to clear the walls. His job was to get the ladders up against the walls so that the men could get over. So you can see, can't you? It was just a fascinating action, and it has that massively medieval feel about it.
Again, Pete, I said this before, but the balls required to grab those ladders and run in under machine gun fire. Interesting, he was saying that it was lucky they were shooting down, because obviously he's referring to the fact that the bullets coming straight down, it was harder to hit the men than it would have been if they were firing at ground level. But gee, that would have been a hell of an adventure to run forward with those ladders.
I think what's interesting as well is a lot of these men by now would be used to night fighting, because most of the fighting at this period in 1918 was done in the dark. The best advances, or the great advances, were night advances or dawn advances. So this is the middle of the afternoon. So this is very different. This is broad daylight that they're actually operating in.
So the New Zealanders spill over the wall and obviously throw open the gates so that the rest of their men can join them.
Yeah.
And as you said, the Germans surrendered. Let's continue walking around the town and exploring these sites.
Well, the next thing we're going to come to, and it's just less than 10 paces further up, is the actual memorial that's been placed here. And it's very different to what we described earlier, the obelisks and the memorials to the missing. This is a plaque on the wall, and it's literally on the spot where they went over the wall. And it is a depiction in stone. It's a bas-relief of men climbing the ladders and going over the wall. Above them, you have Victory looking down and holding her wreath, and then we have palms and fern leaves. So it's a beautiful memorial and a great thing to look at, because you're positioned opposite on the other side, on the first set of ramparts, looking across, and a great place. And a lot of this is very, very beautiful, and this is no different. Even better, we can now cross the Sluice Gate Bridge, as did the soldiers who put up the ladder. So it's exactly the same one. It's not changed. It's not changed at all. So we can cross that and literally get a better view of what it was like being literally under the walls and about to climb up the ladders to get on top of the walls. We're going to just walk through the ramparts, through the Sally Gate, and then turn around and come back out, because we want to remain on the outside of the walls to continue the walk. So. On we go, and we're going to then cross over onto the other side, walking around the outside of the walls, and this is one of the areas where they came under really, really heavy fire. That fighting I was talking about when they're trying to get the ladders up. So this is where the 2nd and 4th Rifles were pinned down and taking heavy casualties whilst trying to get the ladders up. So I always have a stop here and look back. And again, you get a good view of what it would be like to come round from these ramparts and suddenly be faced by, literally at this point, by machine guns and trench mortars and grenades. And you're trying to get up your ladders up against the wall. And so it's not, perhaps, I have to say, I underestimated this action for a long time. I thought, oh, that was easy, just getting over the walls. Well, it is. That last final bit was easy, but it was getting to that point that was well, easy, that's not a good word, but it wasn't as dangerous as it could have been because nobody was actually shooting at them as they climbed over the walls. But yeah, prior to that, it had been very dangerous and very deadly for an awful lot of men. So we're going to then walk round to another entrance. It's called Port St. Martin, and this is one of the main roads into the town. Well, they're not main roads, it's just the traffic. This is an actual road, so traffic is coming in through the town here. And here you can see battle damage from both 1918, the fighting that we're discussing, and also 1940 on the stone outer walls. So you can see where shells have hit the walls. And this archway, the once would have been a bridge over the road, is gone. It's been very badly damaged, actually, in this area here. And this is where we're going to pass inside into the town again. And we're going to walk then inside the walls. The houses will be on our right-hand side. The walls will be on our left-hand side. And so we're walking on the roads within the town. And we'll walk round further and we get to Port Valenciennes, which is the road that would lead to Valenciennes, the biggest city. It's about, I suppose, an hour, no less, half an hour away from here. And if you had time, we haven't got time on this walk, but if we had time, we'll be able to walk up that road and go and visit the Le Quesnoy Communal Cemetery extension, which is the Commonwealth War Graves extension here. And sadly, this is where we would find quite a lot of the men that died in the fighting, and the estimates vary considerably, but I don't think I'm going to go for about 90 outright deaths in the fighting, and some of those are buried in this cemetery. There's actually 126 burials, but some of them are soldiers who died in German hands. There was quite a big prisoner of war camp here. This has been used throughout the war as part of the route taking soldiers back out of France into Belgium and then across into Germany. And some of them were used for working parties here and remained here for a while. And certainly we have soldiers who were dying of various either wounds or diseases and buried in the German cemetery, but they were then centralised and brought to the Le Quesnoy Communal Cemetery extension. Always worthwhile going and have a look at those, especially with the men that died on the 4th of November fighting here. And then we're going to carry on walking through the town to another bastion. This is called Bastion Caesar. And this one is definitely worth a look at because we can see part of the history of it going even further back to the 16th century, and really was looking at the beginning of firearms and artillery. And we can see artillery embrasures, in other words, the points where guns were used to fire through the walls, through the gaps in the walls. And these had been covered over by Vauban's improvements, and they decided to remove part of the Vauban improvements, the brick improvements, and we can see part of that earlier history of the ramparts here. So there's a whole load of history to look at in the town itself. The next thing, as we walk up Rue George V, so a name relative to the Great War again, and we will see something called Kasserine Lohendel. And it's an old infantry barracks, about 120 metres long, and built to withstand mortar bombs. And these would be the great big cast mortar bombs, sometimes full of explosives, not the bombs that we recognise of the First World War. These are big spherical bombs that were fired from old-fashioned mortars. And so it's a lovely building to look at. It's now been completely renovated and is used for homes and also for businesses. Nice to see it being used. And then the final bastion that we're going to look at is Port de Flamangerie. That sounds like it might be right. Flamangerie, who knows? That's the final one. They're all quite similar, these, but in various states of repair or disrepair. And this one again is better than the previous one, but isn't brilliant. But it's all worth looking at. And This walk that we're doing now, it would normally take us about, well, if you're stopping and starting like I normally do, well over 2 hours to walk right round the town. There's a different walk that takes you right round the outside of the ramparts as well. So there's multiple different ways you can walk the whole site. I've just got a section here just with the figures on. So casualties for the 2nd and 4th Rifles, they lost about 180 men. Now in this case, lost means casualties. Normally a third of those would be killed outright. So I think 90 is probably a fairly accurate figure, or as accurate as you're going to get it. And that's in the 2nd and 4th Rifles. They are the attacking battalions, the assaulting battalions. The 4th Rifles, who were the first people over the walls, they captured 700 Germans, 4 field guns and 45 machine guns. So you can see that an awful lot of equipment being captured. At this point, something we haven't talked about is the state of the Germans here. Well, the Germans, this is the big problem at this part of the war. Some Germans will fight on to the end, and an awful lot of them will quite happily, when they feel it's a good time to surrender. But that's the problem. You didn't know which you were going to face, and that's why we have an awful lot of casualties during the 100 days, even though most Germans would have been aware that they're going to lose the war and the war is over, but some are quite happy to fight on right to the end. So the figures for the New Zealand division in its entirety during this action, they travelled 10 kilometres, so they captured 10 kilometres of ground on this day, 2,450 prisoners in total and 60 field guns. So it was a very, very successful final action for the New Zealand forces. Seen as such an important one that the French President Raymond Poincaré, he came out only 6 days after the action, and a New Zealand Guard of Honour was paraded for him in the town square. So where we started the tour and where we're going to finish it, this is where the New Zealand Guard of Honour paraded for the French President 6 days after the action. And I think it gives you an idea of how important it was seen at the time. There's also another connection to Australia in a way. At Villers-Bretonneux, we have the Victoria School. Well, here the school is named after Lieutenant Averill. So he is commemorated in the naming of the school in the town as well. So a little bit like the Victoria School in Villers-Bretonneux for Australia.
Pete, it's always extraordinary when you see the returns for these battles in 1918. I know the Germans were effectively beaten by this stage, so they were not putting up as big a fight as they would have in the earlier stages of the war. But look at that, 2,450 prisoners taken for the loss of only 180 men, so about 15 to 1. And that's just the prisoners. That doesn't count the men killed and wounded as well. So the blow that we were giving the German army at this stage, it's always worth remembering. I mean, I think we've moved on from the whole stabbed in the back narrative that the Nazis pushed pretty hard in the Second World War, but the German army was soundly defeated during the First World War. In those closing days of 1918, really in the second half of 1918, the German army was soundly defeated, and you can just see that in the number of men captured. I mean, they only would have been held in prison camps for a month or so before they would have been released, but just the numbers of men taken, killed, prisoners, guns, machine guns, they were just being swept aside by the advancing Allies. Absolutely extraordinary. And this is a perfect example of a small action, but demonstrating how that would work.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, isn't it? In my youth, when I first became very interested in the Great War, there were very few books on the 100 Days, on this last kind of phase of the Great War, because it's almost like we were so concentrating on the horror and all the terrible aspects of it that nobody really wanted to talk about the success. And it's only in recent years there's loads and loads of books now written about that last 100 days, and so we can get a really good idea of what was going on. But for a young man, you know, in the 70s, trying to discover what went on towards the end of the war, what caused the end of the war. Was it us, or was it just, it was almost, you kind of got the feeling it was just exhaustion, that everybody was just had enough and eventually the war finished because we'd just had enough. And that's not the case at all. It is a very, very successful 100 days that will eventually force the Germans to ask for call for an armistice.
Well, Pete, a very successful 100 days and a very successful one day that we've spent walking around the town of Le Quesnoy. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful sight. I have not been here on the ground, And again, we're adding to our extensive list of places you're going to take me when eventually I can come back to the battlefields in about 15 years or so from now, I think it will be.
You're going to need at least a few months, Matt, a few months. That list is getting very long.
Mate, I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. So much great stuff to see, and I hope that you listening have enjoyed hearing us walk around as well. But Pete, just absolutely fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Pleasure, Matt. Very enjoyable.
Okay, I have 2 new obsessions that I need to share with you. Impress No Glue Press-On Manis and Impress Press-On Falsies Lashes. Trust me, these are getting ready game changers. Both require no glue, so there is no damage to your natural nails and lashes, no mess, and no annoying dry times. Just one step and you're done. Boom. Instant glam. Visit impressbeauty.com/presson and use code PRESSON25 at checkout for 25% off Impress Manicure and Press-On Falsies.
Balancing a wellness routine and busy travel plans? Try Alo Moves, the health and wellness app you need to stay consistent. Alo Moves goes with you and offers yoga, Pilates, strength workouts, and so much more. From 5 minutes to 60-minute classes, Alo Moves has a class or flow that fits your schedule. There's also meditations, sound baths, nutrition tips, and self-care tutorials to meet your holistic wellness goals on your time. Go to allomoves.com and use the code ACAST to claim your 30-day free trial today.